Good morning and welcome to Our Stories. Our guest today is Nadine Wimmer, and Nadine and I have been talking about her past in terms of particularly her youth, because she's not a Central Illinois native like so many people here. From our conversations, Nadine, you, to me, I would say are a person who throughout your life has been up for trying new things. But before we get to that, I need have you build some background for people here about yourself. So, because you didn't come from Central Illinois like most people around here do, you grew up on the coast of Alabama. Tell us about your family and who made up your family and what your parents did and so forth.
Okay, my father was a commercial shrimper, and my mother was a homemaker. They had a big garden. When I was young, we had a milk cow. I was the third child. My brother was 6 years older. I had a sister that was like 19 months older, but she was severely handicapped, and eventually she was always bedridden. And then I had a sister who's 4 years younger than I am, and she now lives in Iowa. And and my brother is deceased. So anyway, and then my father for years he did he worked. At one time he worked in an oyster, catching oysters, but he eventually decided he could do shrimping, and he had a boat 33 feet long that we had. Our house was not a fancy house. It was on cement blocks, and it was just, there were other people that lived the same way, and it was not a terribly cold environment. You did not have big freezes. If it froze and put a little ice on the top of water, oh, it was cold, look at that ice, because it was gone before the end of the day. And we would think it was fun just to drop an oyster shell on it, because we didn't have rocks. Right. They fixed the roads with oyster shells and then put red dirt on them if you didn't live where there were the paved ones. When I was 5 or 6 years old, we did get electricity, and I think maybe in one room or two, and then it wasn't even in the rest of the house. I don't know. But when you live there, that's just the way things are.
Right. And everybody was in the same boat, so it wasn't like that you were the only ones.
No, and I didn't know anything anyway.
Yeah.
We did not have kindergarten. That was unheard of, or maybe it was for rich people who could go to a kindergarten. I don't know. And so whenever my brother was 6 years older, the first and second grade, I just walked. I walked to school, and I guess it was 3/4 of a mile, because and I lived down a street that the school bus went in front of, but if I walked down there, they were not going to pick me up. So I just walked. And I walked down. It was not even a paved road. It was like with the oyster shells and all that.
And you walked across the drawbridge?
Well, right after that, I walked across what we call the Humpback Bridge, which was a little bridge that, it just went up like this, and a creek came under that. Then we walked down and turned left, and then you get ready to walk across the drawbridge, right? Yeah, because it was on the bayou, because that's what Biola Battery was. We think the word battery was made up from the word Baittre, which may have been when the French built some kind of a fortification there at one time years ago. But storms and stuff do a lot of damage in that area.
Yeah.
When I say storms, I mean like hurricanes.
Right.
Anyway, I walked across the drawbridge, and this was interesting because the drawbridge could go up, but you wouldn't know when, because a boat coming from up the bayou or down the bayou, a guy would get out there and he would blow 3 long blasts on a horn. And it could be, one that was more expensive, but my dad had one that you just picked up, and blew into it. And and then the guy on the bridge, because there was a little house, kind of a little built-in place, and he would put the things down, barriers down, so people would stop, and then clang, 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 and the bridge would open up like this. Now, that was the bridge when I was younger. Later, they built a different one, but the platform went up like this, which, I remember the other one, because,
Sure.
yes, that's the one I remember the most. And
So you went to school there.
Right.
And graduated high school.
correct.
Okay. And then you and your cousin decided to go to college in Iowa.
Well, maybe I better back up a little bit and say that my family was into the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's what I was raised.
Okay.
And my dad was an elder, and we were very, very strong in our religion, and they even, when I was little, we went to my grandfather's house, and that's where we met, and we'd have church service there. Somebody would have a Sunday school lesson on the back porch, and somebody would have one in one bedroom and in the kitchen, whatever,
Sure.
And that was just it was a small group. But then, and my grandpa was, he was the one that we'd go to hear the most.
Sure.
And then, anyway, that was kind of an interesting thing. And so that's one thing that made me go to Iowa, was because that church had a college called Graceland College in Lamoni, Iowa. And so that was a place where we thought would be a good place to go. However, I thought it would be expensive, and I graduated in '60, and then I was working I was working on classes at a vocational school to do office work. But when my cousin, Ruth Downey, came over and said, Nadine, I think we should, she was going to graduate that year, I think we should apply and go to Graceland this year. And I thought, oh my goodness. So there was a
Long way from
thought.
home.
Yeah, well, I wasn't worried about that. I was thinking, what about the money?
Oh, yeah.
What about the money? And so then I talked to my parents, and they were okay with it. But when I was going to that school, I ended up saying I need to have a job. And there was a guy in my church, his brother was on a board of a credit union, and he said she would be a good person if you need somebody to work in your office. And they hired me, and I worked for a few weeks part-time, and then they put me on full-time as a clerk in the office. They put me in a place where I would take in checks, take in cash, take in payments for loans, and it was, a credit union,
So that supported your going to school.
And I put just about everything in my bank account. Not that I made a lot, but at least it was a big help.
Sure, yeah.
And my folks were willing to help out on that, even though it was more than most state schools, And so.
So you graduate from there, and you and your cousin both decide to apply for teaching?
No, my cousin, she wanted to come back to Alabama.
That's right, yeah.
Because she came back after the first year, but she did come back the last year. And one year I went to an Alabama school and then came back for my senior year. But she was in high school, and she wasn't interested in staying there. She wanted to go back to Alabama.
Right.
Yeah.
But you and your roommate.
She was my roommate, yes.
Yeah.
But I knew another person. It was a real cohesive group. We had dorms. This was a religious-related school. We didn't have a lot of wild parties.
Right.
It was more, Anyway, then, so I became acquainted with this lady named Delitha Raines, who, like I said, only person I ever knew that played a harp.
Played the harp, yeah.
Yes. I never had known anybody. And then we called her Tilly, and she said, Nadine, I've talked to Sarah is a person she knew, and I knew who she was. I think I would like to go someplace other than Independence. That's where she was from. Let's go to Decatur, Illinois. So I thought about it, and I thought that would be interesting. That'd be interesting. Then, so
Have you
I
ever
thought,
been here?
never been there. She told me about it. I think she'd been there, but been here. But no, I thought, well, I'm going to be her roommate.
Yeah. So you got a notice that said, come to work here. Right?
A lady called me. She
me.
was
Yeah.
Charlotte Meyer, who was the director of elementary education.
Yeah.
And she told me later I was the only one she had interviewed and not seen that year. You can tell that in the 60s they were hard up for teachers. They didn't even have to see you.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so I said, I'll do it. And she sent me an actual contract to sign.
Yeah.
2 days later, Tilly called. Nadine, I've gotten a job at Galesburg. And they have plenty of openings for elementary people in Galesburg. And I thought, ooh, I already told Charlotte Meyer that I would come here. And so I said, no, I've already got a contract coming for somebody in Decatur.
Shortly after you began teaching, you met a man.
Yeah, I met my husband, to be.
Yeah.
His name was Albert, but he always went by Al. He said when he went in the Army, nobody knew anybody named Albert. So he said, just call me Al, and that's what they started calling him.
Yeah.
But I started in 65, he came in 67.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you got married, and you're both teaching.
Right.
And then
We didn't go to church for a while. We just didn't go,
Right.
It wasn't that we were anti-church, We just did other things, how
Right.
people can do sometimes.
Sure.
And then finally, when we had, we didn't have children for a long time, and then finally I said, and my husband said, "Ooh, we should have." I thought, okay. So that was pretty quick, And then we had Mandy, and then it wasn't too long. We had one more, even though I was older, but that was okay. And so then we decided we would go to church, and he had been raised in a Methodist church. I had been raised in this, the other church, and I thought, well, we can just meet halfway. Well, I don't know. I said, okay. And we knew a friend that went to Mount Zion Presbyterian Church, and we thought, well, let's try it.
Sure.
And so we went there, and eventually we joined that church. And we took our kids there, and I can't even remember how long we stayed there, but quite a while there. And but the kids were getting to where, the kids they were in school with, and they were not Mount Zion students.
Sure.
So we thought, well, we'll come to First Pres, and maybe there'll be some Decatur high school people there. Mm-hmm. But there's a mixture, there's
Sure.
Eisenhower and MacArthur, but it still was okay. It was
Sure.
better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then your husband decided that teaching wasn't his thing.
Yeah, that's true. And it was kind of tough. He was an old-fashioned kind of person. He wanted you to come in, get ready I'll teach you. Well, and then so eventually he just got tired of the difficulties.
Right.
And we had the 2 children, and so he ended up staying at home and taking care of them, which was really beneficial, and it was certainly a good job. You know what I mean. And we had been saving money anyway, so we didn't feel neglected. We didn't have a problem with living from one check. We really didn't.
Then your husband passed away in 2011.
Of course, the kids were already gone by then
Right.
and doing other things. Uh-huh.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
But then you decided to do something that you hadn't done before,
Well, besides joining the church, I
Yeah,
decided
well,
to join the church.
Join the church,
I thought, I've been here so long, why don't I? So I did. And then immediately they said, don't you want to be a deacon? So,
Yeah. So you got very involved right from the get-go. Yeah. And then you retired but then after you retired, you again kind of stretched yourself out by going on a trip to Europe. So what do you remember about your trip to Europe that was kind of stands out for you?
Well, it was all very nice. We flew to what was it? Czech Republic, Prague,
Yeah.
you know, and then we were there, and when I first saw the list on that Prague, I thought, I've heard of that. I know nothing about it. So I had to kind of look things up so
Yeah.
I could be a little bit more informed, you know. And so that was interesting, and we walked, you know, a lot of, it was hilly and all that. We went through a museum that had a lot of history, so much history of, you know, of people that our country does not have for leaders, you know. And I can't even remember all the terminology, but, you know, people in very elaborate costumes, pictures on the wall.
Right.
And anyway, it was really nice that this particular riverboat that we were on did have where you could plug something in, and the person who was traveling with us, when she told us about what was going on, we could hear her.
Yeah.
So it was nice not to have, you know, not being able to understand.
Yeah.
There were many people around those groups, you know, and if we hadn't had that, we wouldn't have been able to
Yeah.
hear her.
Yeah.
And then after that day, we got on a bus and drove 4 hours, and we went to Nuremberg. And then you could see, in Nuremberg, of course, I think you said you'd been there. And you could see the bleachers and where Adolf Hitler had marched his men. And they didn't keep it up as a wonderful thing. It was sort of like disrepair, and they did that on purpose.
Right.
And Rosemary Thompson was my roommate on that trip. That was interesting. And quite a few other people from First Pres were there. Betty Smith and Jean Gift and some other,
Sure.
Kathy Bondurant and some other
Yeah.
people were on there.
Well, it sounds like you had a nice group to travel with.
That was really good. Yes, it was. Okay.
Well, thanks so much for sharing about your life. You had a very diverse set of, you know, experiences in your life, and
Well, thank you.
some very interesting things, and certainly, you know, as I said, you've kind of, from where you started in Alabama, stretched yourself throughout your life. So.
Sometimes that was a little bit, you know, hopeful thinking, and it worked out okay, thankfully.
Yeah, okay.
You know, sometimes it could have been worse, but thank you for having me.
Sure, okay.